Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Sweeney. I am the Director of Education and Special Programs at the Center for Nonprofit Advancement. Very excited to be with you today with our Board Leadership Award Learning video series. We're filming 3 videos. This is actually our first one. Doesn't matter if you watch them in any specific order, but this is the first one we're filming. So I'm excited to kind of talk to you about the award itself. The Board Leadership Award has 2 main purposes. One is to recognize really awesome board leadership and board governance in our local nonprofit sector. But the second one, and the reason we're here today, is to also share some best practices that come out during the process and really get to lift up those really innovative practices that can hopefully help out a lot of people in the sector. So to tell you a little bit more about our sponsor of the award, Cohn Resnick, we're joined today by Anne Schranz. Anne, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sean. First and foremost, I want to thank the Center and the selection committee for all of their hard work in connection with this year's Board Governance Award. Another great year. We've been involved from the beginning with the Center and really, as Sean said, love to really hold up great boards like we have today and share best practices so that everyone can learn from it. As a national audit and accounting firm, providing advisory services as well, board governance is so crucial. And, we're just thrilled to have the Friends of the Library of Montgomery County. And as a lifelong Montgomery County resident, I thank them for all their great work that they do. And I'd like to introduce Pam Saucy and Ari Brooks. And thank you all so much for the great work that you do.
Great, thanks so much, Anne. I'll mention that we're joined by Pam and Ari, who are with Friends of the Library of Montgomery County, who are this year's winner. We'll be filming 2 videos with FOLMC, as well as 1 video with this year's honorable mention, which is Imagination Stage, also based in Montgomery County in Maryland. So the purpose of this first video is to talk about making board service easier. Board service is hard, no matter what. They're volunteer positions. There's a lot of work that goes into them. But one thing that came out during this year's process was that FOLMC does have a few things in place just to make things a little bit easier for the people who do serve on their board and who volunteer as board members. Talking about those awesome practices, what are some items that you do have in place to ease this burden on people who are looking to join your board and who serve on your board?
So Sean, you're so right. Board service can be difficult. And as executive directors, we ask so much of our board members. I mean, these are oftentimes folks who have jobs and lives. And so we definitely found that creating some tools and tip sheets and guides could really help them to show up better in their board service. And I want to talk about some of those tools we use, but I also want to suggest that during the interview process with your board candidates, knowing what they want to get out of their board experience is just as important as knowing what they want to give to your organization and give to the board, and knowing what they want to get out of it actually helped us to build some of these tools. So one of the first things we developed was color-coded financials. And in person, it was a pretty elaborate process. And it actually started because we had a board member who was hearing impaired to make sure that she understood where we were in the discussion. So when she saw everyone in the room pick up the pink sheet of paper, she knew that we were talking about that document. And so basically what we have is a treasurer's report, and that report will have each section that will be discussed, starting with the balance sheet, the income statement, and any other documents that feed into those larger picture documents. And the treasurer's report will actually have a color. So the word, so it will say balance sheet pink. It gets kind of fun sometimes too, because board members will say, well, is this pink, or is it lavender, or is it green, or is it chartreuse? And it's just it's a fun conversational piece. And so So that corresponding document then will also be that color. And again, it helped in the beginning because there was a person who was hearing impaired on the board, but it also helps to just with the paper shuffling, and so that people can get grounded in like what document they're looking at and help with the conversation to make that flow a little faster. Another document that we have we have a guide for how to read a 990, and we have a board guide to how to read an audit. And so it's just very high level parts of those documents that, of course, we encourage everyone to read through the entire document, but it's a very high level presentation of exactly what you should be looking at and why. And that document gets updated every year, and it even drills down to this is the page where your name will actually appear. Make sure it's your legal name. Make sure it's spelled correctly. So those two go out prior to when those two documents are being approved. And of course, everyone gets a copy of the full 990, but accompanied by that is that guide. Another document that we use is called the FOLMC meeting procedures. And that actually came about because of our efforts to recruit young professionals. And so another great strategy is when there's trainings, ask your board to attend those trainings and then create a learning circle where they come back and disseminate that information to the executive director or to other board members. And so there was a training that I believe the Maryland Library Association had on how to recruit young professionals, and I couldn't attend it. So Pam, my board president, attended and came back with some really concrete tips. And one of the things that we learned is that it can be intimidating to be on a board as a young professional. And so how do you break down some of those barriers and create tools that will help them understand the board process, how to conduct yourself in a meeting, when is it okay to talk, how to how does the board make decisions, where to find core documents. And that definitely was a great tool so that, again, young professionals felt like they understood what was happening in the meetings, but it also has helped us to grow them in their leadership positions, because when they've taken on chair roles and they have to give reports, then they can go through that document with me or Pam and they can understand, well, this is how I give my report. This is how I call for, go throughout the various decision-making process. The other thing that we have are interview questions. So for the interviews of prospective candidates, there's a set list of questions that's used by everyone in the room so that it's an equitable process. And it's a scoring form so that everyone assigns a number to it. And then we come up with a total tally at the end of the interview process. And then we can, or the board can then say, well, my score is this or my score is that. And so we can kind of look at, well, if it fell into a certain range, was everybody in the same, in agreement, or were we very different on, or were they very different on how they, experienced the interview? So those are some of the tools, the most used tools that we have.
Great, thanks so much for sharing that list. I think it's a really helpful kind of like baseline of things that other people can put into place in their own organizations and own boards. So thanks for sharing that. So one thing that you talked about a little bit already was just kind of a guide to help people really learn like how board meetings function. And one way that came up during the selection process through this year's award was when we were talking about something that the committee really loved about your organization, which was how thoughtfully you bring on student leaders onto your board. And this was one area where that came up as well, kind of giving them like a tip sheet to learn just kind of how things work. We mentioned, or we talked about during the process at least, how to use Robert's Rules of Orders, that type of things for kind of board parliamentary procedure during the actual meetings themselves. So I want to just kind of break this down a little bit. First off, just how did you decide that you wanted to have student board members? And how did you actually go about advertising that those positions were available to your community?
Sure, and I can speak to this as well, because having student board members actually predates me. So I'm in my 20th year with the organization, but prior to my coming on board, there was a student. And I'll have to say that I was coming as she was leaving. But I had the opportunity to listen to her speak at her last board meeting as she went off to university. And I was so impressed with that student and thought, this is definitely something that we need to continue. Like, young people need a voice at this table because libraries are for everyone, right? And so we want to make sure that the people that libraries benefit get that seat at the table. And so it definitely started off as something that I thought was important to diversify the board, but it evolved. And so one of the ways that it has evolved is that we not only have one student member, we actually have two student members now. We have a junior and a senior. And it evolved into, again, a way to diversify the board to actually being, for me, very intentional around sustainability. And so I always say that I have one of the highest job satisfactions of anyone I know. And there was a time at which I thought, I don't want this organization to be able to exist without me, right? Like, I want to be the organization. And then I, matured in my professional growth and said, you know what, if you love this organization as much as you say you do, Ari, you're going to want it to live beyond you. And so it really, having those student members really evolved into how to sustain the mission of the organization, how to get young people excited about supporting libraries and growing their leadership skills in the library support realm. And so the way that we bring them on board is through word of mouth, mostly through the students. And when I say word of mouth, that's a little bit of an outdated term because really they get on social media now, right? I mean, and they have friends and followers, triple the amount of, I am as an older person. And so they actually help to recruit their peers. And so they do that through Instagram and Twitter. And so they actually put the calling out and saying, this was a valuable learning opportunity for me. And it's a great resume builder. It's a great way to be heard in your community. And it's a great way to learn about libraries, the inner workings of libraries and how to support libraries. We also put out messages to the principals and the guidance counselors, and it shouldn't be a surprise that one of the most effective recruitment strategies is contacting the school's media specialists, because if a student is a library person or a book person, they're going to have a relationship with their media specialists, the school librarians. And so we put out a call. So that might look like a flyer or a press release, and actually have them to identify students who might want to apply for the position. Having those two students is really helpful though, because the junior will go through a whole year of serving on the board. It's a 2-year commitment. And so that senior then helps to mentor the younger student. And so someone who looks like they do, or, is in the same, age ranges they do, that speaks their language, then can help bring them along. Another thing we do right from the very beginning is connect those student board candidates with student or youth focused board members. So we're very fortunate because we have a Montgomery County Public School librarian on our board. We have had former MCPS principals on our board. We have another person who works for the school system on our board. And so getting them to conduct the interview is so helpful because they can relate to students. They can talk about the students' schools and, oh, I know your principal, or I taught your principal, or just kind of break it down so that there's not that barrier adult student, and make them feel more comfortable in the room. So even though we have a board development and governance committee that's responsible for interviews, we bring in those board members who have that youth-focused background to help throughout the interview process. And then we actually connect them to someone on our board who has an interest in students and an interest in mentoring. And the board has created a student working group. And so the students work with that group of people, again, whether it's something that they do professionally or just something that's a personal interest in youth development. They work throughout their entire 2-year tenure on various projects, and those board members help them identify, what are their interests? Again, what are they hoping to give to the board? What are they hoping to get out of the board experience? And this year we had probably one of the most innovative, and we've had a lot of really great student-led projects, but we had one of the most innovative student-led projects ever, where the rising senior talked about in her interview how libraries were really a safe place for her. And really during the pandemic, because now we have these students who, are coming of age throughout the pandemic, and they might have started in middle school. They might have been in middle school at the start of the pandemic, but now they're in high school. And so all of that, mental health and mental wellness focus that's being poured into students right now, the student actually talked about how the library was a resource to her to help with her mental health and her mental well-being. And so the students actually created a mental health and wellness panel discussion where they brought in experts. There was a school mindfulness expert. There was a librarian from another jurisdiction, and a woman who created an organization around writing as a mental wellness strategy. And the students came up with questions and led the panel discussion and worked with MCPS librarians to develop a resource list of all of the library books and programs from, the knitting programs. I mean, that can be a form of self-care is something as simple as learning how to knit, right? And so they pulled together all of these resources with the help of an MCPL librarian, a school mindfulness expert, and then it culminated in a 5 to 8 minute mindfulness exercise. And it was simply amazing. And there were over 60 students who registered for this. And on top of that, we were able to work with MCPS to give students who participated in the panel an hour of student service learning. And in the state of Maryland, you have to have a certain amount of hours, SSL hours, to graduate. And so you have to get that approved through student service learning. And we were able to create an opportunity for the students to go through a set of questions and interactions and participation to then be eligible to receive an hour of student service learning, because MCPS got really creative with giving kids SSL hours or giving them opportunities to earn SSL hours. And so we fit that criteria. And so you could come, and that also removes some of the stigma, because if you say someone, well, I'm going to a mental health workshop, that's one thing, but the other, way of being able to participate in saying, well, I'm going to a workshop to help earn SSL hours, helped again to increase, we hope, the participation in that program as well. So it's really about now sustaining our mission and making sure that young people feel a part of being able to contribute to the organization.
Awesome. Yeah. What an impressive project. And it sounds like it's partly due to the fact that these students were so clearly awesome, but also the fact that they must have felt very supported in their board service with FOLMC to be able to really launch that program. So that's incredible. I think my last question is just, another kind of taking the easy board service from a different angle is, one way to add clarity to board service, I think, is always making sure to bring things back to the mission of the organization and, why everyone there is there in the first place. So how do you do that with your board members? Do you have any formalized things that go on during your meetings? How does it work?
So definitely being mission driven, I would say, is my claim to fame. Making sure that we all understand what our purpose is. So of course, it's the board's job to create that vision for the organization and the mission. And it's really my job to make sure that the day-to-day activities meet the mission, that we set those goals to meet the mission. And so it's very important to me that my board understands that I take that very seriously. And so the best way for me to do that is to make sure that the strategic plan is alive, that it is a living document, that the board sees that document and the status of that document at every board meeting. And that's actually another tool that we use I didn't talk about earlier. We have a pretty elaborate strategic planning dashboard that is a color-coded, we're really into colors, spreadsheet, so to speak, that outlines, at the very top, the mission, vision, and values of the organization, each goal, each objective and strategy, and then an area for reporting on the status of the strategy. And the metrics are also embedded into that document. And so, and also who's responsible for that objective and what's the timeline and what's the status of the timeline. So for example, if it's green, it means all, we're going. My daughter just got a driver's license. I'm really into this green, yellow, red thing now. So if it's green, it's a go, right? We're on track for meeting this, and yeah, we're just working towards it. And so the status section will indicate all of the tasks that went under the strategy. If it's yellow, there's some sort of a workaround that's being created so that we can meet the goal, but we're still on track, so to speak, or slightly off track. And red is, this isn't going to happen, right? Like this isn't going to happen probably within the time frame, or it might not happen in the course of the entire, strategic plan. But keeping that document and the status of that document alive at all times throughout the board meetings is really key to making sure that the board understands, why we're here. And so, for example, if I have that one board member that says, Ari, let's build an arc, right? I'll say, well, let me check that dashboard. Okay. And so, I see right here, we're supposed to build an arc under 1.2.1. I'm supposed to build the arc, and the Finance and Audit Committee is responsible for that. And well, we're not quite yet there for that arc because that's in the second year of the strategic plan. Okay. And so, and I refer back to it when I get questions from board members, especially, ideas about things. And another thing that I do is whenever we have agendas for meetings, every agenda item will have that corresponding number to the dashboard. And so the committee understands how this very specific agenda item relates to the overall strategic plan. And so when you see the agenda, it might say 1.2.3, and maybe you don't know exactly what that means, but I do. And I can relate it back to the strategic plan dashboard, and I can pull up the dashboard, or my deputy can pull up the dashboard as a part of her administrative function and being in those meetings. And she can say, this is why you're doing what you're doing. And this is how it relates to the overall goals of the organization and how it's relating to, your role to drive, the strategic plan. And so I think that one of the things for me is that I use the mission to, I truly believe that it can answer all questions and solve all problems. Like if there's a question about something, I truly believe that if you just open up that mission statement or dust off those governing documents, that's where your answer lies in everything that you do. And it is definitely very critical in building a highly effective board to make sure that all of those documents and your mission is really front and center for them.
Great, thank you so much for sharing, Ari. Really appreciate it. I think that makes an end for our first video. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate your guidance and your willingness to share on all of these things. I think it'll prove to be very helpful for other members of the nonprofit community. Everyone else, thank you for viewing. Like I said, this is one of 3 videos. No need to watch them in any specific order, but keep an eye out for the other 2. And thank you again to Ari and Pam for being here, and we'll see you all at the next one. Thanks.